โพธิยามูเลสาขยานังนันทิวาเวนัสนาโสทิภาวันตุเต
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุ
Thank you. A great sadhu for a short recitation of Pali Sutta chanting by venerable members of the community of Sangha from Thailand and venerable members of the community of Sangha from Asgiriya Temple, Kandy from Sri Lanka. A very good morning to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all respected venerable members of the community of Sangha from Thailand, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and many other monastics from various other countries, and many Buddhist friends, Dhamma brothers and sisters around the world. Namo Buddhaya, Sapa Mangalang, Tashidale. A very warm welcome to a 2 days teaching program by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on Maha Satipatthana Sutta. Today, 17th of December 2021, is the first day of teaching program. I'm Dhammapala, a Theravada monk from Malaysia. I'm the moderator for today's teaching program. We are absolutely delighted and honored to be blessed by His Holiness on the teaching of this very important suttas called Maha Satipatthana Sutta. We are very grateful for His Holiness, for His compassionate presence online, teaching the Maha Satipatthana Sutta for the benefits and happiness of many. In Pali, Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya. The format of this 1 hour teaching program will be mainly the teaching by His Holiness and followed by question and answer from the floor. Indeed, this is the precious moment for us to learn from the great teacher, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. The Buddha says in the Mangala Suttas, associating with the wise is a great blessing. Panditanang cha sevanang etang mangala muttamam. I hope you will make wise use of this wonderful and rare opportunity to ask His Holiness anything about life, meditation, practice, and cultivation. However, due to overwhelming question from the floor and due to time constraint, we might not be able to attain all of your questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. Now, we request the floor to mute your mic and keep the video open. Please keep the environment calm and peaceful. Listening attentively to the teaching by the Great Master, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. On behalf of all the organizers, His Holiness, I would like to introduce some of your old friends and senior monks to you. Most Venerable Dr. Waskadue, Mahinda Vangsa, Mahanaka Thero, Mahanaka Thero of Sri Sambuddha Sasanodaya Sangha Sabha of Amarapura, Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka. Most Venerable Nyangoda, Vijita Siri, Anunayake Thero. Anunayake or Mawalta chapter of Siang Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka. Venerable Dr. Omaupe Sobihita Nakathero, Chief Sankanayaka for Southern Sri Lanka of Sri Ramanya Mahanikaya. Venerable Narang Panawe Ananda Nakathero, Chief Abbot of Asgiriya Maha Pirvena Kendi. Most Venerable Pra Medi Wajirodom, Venerable Vajira Medi Chentawan International Meditation Center, Thailand. Most Venerable Pra Vajira Yanamuni or Ajahn Achalo, he is the abbot of the Anandagiri Forest Monastery in Thailand. Venerable Sri Saranankara, Naika Mahathera Chief of Malaysia, Theravada Council, Malaysia. Most Venerable Kemacharo Mahathera, the Chairman of Indonesian Supreme Sangha Councils. Most Venerable Dr. Santachit Thera, the Chairman of Kerja Rajasa Buddhist College, Indonesia. Most Venerable Dhammaduta Thera, the Chairman of Indonesian Buddhist Scholars Fellowship, Indonesia. And the last one, Venerable Dr. Dhammapiya Mahathero, Secretary General, International Buddhist Confederation, India. Without further ado, we shall invite Chief Venerable Bodhi Nandamuni to give a welcome speech. Bodhi Nandamuni is the Chief Abbot of Wat Pa Buddhagaya Temple in Bodh Gaya. Bante, please unmute your mic, please.
Kangri rawe korwe singkamdir. Pendang dewa malu chung wene. Chenre sikwang tensing kya soyi. Shabe sithe badu tenchur jik. Good morning, Your Holiness. It's my privilege and honor to see you again. Thank you very much for choosing this wonderful, precious teaching, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, which one of the main practice in Theravada countries and core teaching of Lord Buddha. The Buddha himself says, this is the one and only way to get liberation. This teaching is coordinated by your office in Southeast Asia and organized by Venerable Prabodhinantha Muni Luang Phoi Chiu, Wat Pa Thamachat Meditation Center of Thailand, Srivijaya State Buddhist College of Tangerang, Indonesia, Theravada Buddhist Council, Malaysia, Sri Lanka Tibetan Buddhist Brotherhood Society, ASEAN Dhammaduta Projects Thailand, Tibetan Buddhist Center Singapore and Sri Lanka. On behalf of all the organizers,
Now, can I start my talk? Okay. Nara, Namjunity, döndegi dönde jesu rodu chongjusin gawe solo jangpa memenshin nanjo jolo zhenbe gyalongshi 장소 전부터 되들 그 시네 간단 일신도 덤바야 전두산에 왕한테 저런 시간도 던지되 책디 시부시 누가 쳐보시도 던지셔서 로도 중주시 개별소로 장바매매 신스 점된데기 가 되는 숨 애는 대 광지 대기디 가 춘주간에 싸울로심 애는 제버디 영지 도시상 그 투지 거진 뭐这些 견세 도선에 개성으로 잡아내신 애는 그래서 투두게 터든 줄을 쉬니 애는 일이신도 다 수중글로 실리샤니 애는 띵이지글로 갈 가슴지 상당히 요래 섬지지보다 상당히 요래 애는 슈셔디 애는 장주섬 상로 동야다 애는 동익이 따와 다디 자신 주주기 장주섬 애는 사무도주기 동익이 따와 애는 라진 주주기 애는 시월에 애는 daksennyamji 로샤디디 네 니리신도 상당히 검격이 저상가 던지셔서 개성으로 장범면신 내저 저로 준비 결론 된제지기 다 나를 두시들이 쉬어요라 다 뒤터네 지 애니 쳐줘서야 그래서 톱두기 지금 나래다 냠랜드 데니 지금 컨트리지기다 성리야 지금 유어로 컨트리 쪽이 버드저디 이 쳐줘서 님돌이야 감시하라 시라가오예 에네 다 들대 냐라데 지나서다 발리기 추진 중에 넘버 7 다디네 아니 레자기 추진 중에 다 가다가 사mol로 전된대기 전장 지규리 아니 지기 떠주 잠만을 예버디 전된대 코로나 셰시베 거두네 아니 그러나 지나면 대화적에서로 들은 용기요래 아니 림베기 아니 간단 도데와 아니 샘잠바 우모바 제제르레 낭세기 야 만다든지 다 용되기요래 디디 간다 전된대 코랑기 결혼 다감 캐나 이제 스시다 스신도 레버다라 나이가 라오르 차이 규치 민세네 좀된데도 송도가 저자가 나조리야 좀된데기 제가 지시서 뭐시나 라와 차상 송 전에 아니 좀된데 코랑 그 송왜 까들이야 좀된데기 까르스니 이지셔고 말했어 될 당시 시세네 좀된데 코랑 그 송도가 저상은 말하면서 아니 발리기 취지들에 아니 사고도에 날린데 아니 렉자기 취지가 나로라 아니 좀된데 그 깔ring을 그렇게 잡아치야 쉬우지기다 용돼야지 사들이 이두산에 더 좀된데 그 깔이야 지금 그 리뷰에 잡아잖아. 데 never dare 슈처처 라시 마도 잡아잖아. 애니 슈데 지금 랜자면 전에 애니 대화 장장 가는 거지. 저기 말이 사들이 인도 전된대기 롱도 그 때문에야 시에 대화 토지기 더 고기를 나라 차샤네 어디 전된대기 전장 아니 다쳐 넘는다 삼물람지 전보다 아니 당신님지 로종도 저기 냠린체니 아니 시에 대화 토지니 도스요 아니 chanzo 들이 쳐줘서 도스 제체 아니 하장 가보중 다안데 뒤주디 내년에 지금이 시디 다티 나래야 취규 자면의 이도 삼월로 즉 투부용야지 대 떠중 자면의 요리디 이내 즉 참 가서를 선바 상고치야디 취규 참여 선고요래 다가는 신기 차고 마셔야 돼 취규 참여 선고도가 아니 무직부 자가기미 제인데 아니 발리 취규 중에 참을로기 간다 잠닝지 냠는시야다 세번 냠는시야 샤나 차와미샤 상매 송구도와 아니 자가나리야 다래 아니 출루카디디기 차와미시야서디 쉬울 송구도와
주의디
세사 자가나리야 아니 로동자 하거든요 로동자 니글 하거든요 차와미시야다 아니 그러다 ahimsa 처음에 지어야 되다. 아니 거루나서야 참지서야 돼. 노동자 하는 순수증을 떠주디 레디기도 봐. 세상가 다 디디 나서 디 락지를 야가가 나로 출루 먼저 망고요래. 카시셔요래. 아니 이슈도 아자자. 아니 힌두 자면자 제인 자면자 chen 여디디 참말로 자갈 투다도보도 맞아 미비다스지 출루 튼지디 미비다스 여도지 레도와 자상가 나데 자갈 센지어 제니 로디디 심벌이 뭐네지 자갈이야 아니 출루 튼지디 아니 차와메지야다 출루 튼지디 뭐네지 지수이랑 semke tingne pe kasor kya chigi o tendishto santa teride ganazo da pale ki chugyu nabozo da ene leja ki chugyu nabozo azu tus tuche da gesha gogo chung hajan kya wa sang go chung enda nabozo chöchilin on nyal des
나 주의디
지 그러고 매더라
아니 저질래 인다
말이 그냥 주의디
네
내가 그래
이나
어디
So it's a great joy for me to have this opportunity to be with you all, venerable Sangha members, and we are all students of one and the same teacher, Lord Buddha. In my own case, every day, every morning when I get up, I recite a particular stanza which was composed by the 14th century Tibetan master Tsongkhapa. And that stanza, 4-line stanza, captures something that is very dear to my heart and also shows the level of devotion on the part of practitioners like myself towards the Buddha. And the stanza says that having taken the monastic vows as the basis for my practice, and also having engaged in the study of the great teachings of the Buddha and other masters, and then having implemented these, put these into practice through, yogic practices, I have developed this devotion and faith towards you, the great teacher, referring to the Buddha. So this really is a stanza that is very dear to my heart. And also I personally identify with the sentiments expressed in these 4 lines very deeply. I've had the privilege to be able to take the monastic vows when I was very young, and which thus establishing the basis for the foundation morality practice. And then in my own life, I've been privileged to have access to a great teacher, my main principal tutor, Yongdzin Rinpoche, who, thanks to his kindness, I've been able to be exposed to the vast teachings of the Buddha, as well as the great masters that came after the Buddha, and spend enough time, actually not a minimal time, but quite a bit of time, delving deeply into these teachings and the great treatises. And thanks also to having the opportunity to engage deeply in the practice so that I can implement what I have learned. The content of the learning for a Buddhist needs to be put into practice through meditative cultivation. And in my own personal practice, of course, on the basis of morality, one of the important practices is the cultivation of single-pointedness of mind, which is the concentration and shamatha. And because the concentration and the shamatha practice allows us to be able to have some ability to apply our mind in a focused way. So that's really a key part of the practice. And then with that kind of mental technique, the main focus really is, in my own personal case, cultivation of bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings, grounded in universal compassion. This is an important teaching coming from what in the Tibetan tradition we call the lineage of the profound, lineage of the vast practices. And then the second focus of my practice is the teaching on shunyata, emptiness, which is really understanding of the deeper nature of reality. And this set of teachings is referred to as teachings coming from the lineage of profound view. And then the third lineage, main focus, is the teachings coming from Shantideva, focused particularly on altruistic intention, equalizing self and others, and exchanging self and others, and expanding one's altruistic orientation of the heart. So these 3 are my main focus of cultivation. And as a result, as I deepen my own personal practice, the more I am able to gain something from these practices, the deeper my devotion and reverence to the great teacher Buddha becomes. So this is something that I wanted to share with you. And the recollection of the Buddha is something that we as Buddhists must do on a daily basis. And in my own case, that's the first thing in the morning when I do by reciting those verses. So of course, Buddha's, when we talk about the Buddha's teachings and the tradition that came from the Buddha, broadly one can say there is the Pali tradition and there is the Sanskrit tradition. And the Sanskrit tradition is the tradition that really remained and embodied in what came to be known as the Nalanda tradition of the great masters. And the Pali tradition is very well represented in this congregation today. And so when it comes to the philosophical views, we have to admit that there is a diversity of views in the teachings of the Buddha. Even in the history of the Buddhism, we know, for example, there is the emergence of what is called the 18 great schools, from the teachings of the Buddha. And these, each of these schools maintain a slightly different philosophical view. And then within India, if you look at the philosophical history, there is the Vaibhashika, Sutrantika, Chitramatra, mind-only school, and the Madhyamaka. So all of these diverged philosophical views really emerged. And in fact, strictly from a historical point of view, it would make sense because Buddha did not teach just one teaching for everybody. So, and that's why, there is in fact a statement attributed to the Buddha where the Buddha says that just as a goldsmith would test the quality of the gold by rubbing, cutting, and burning, in the same manner, you should examine my statements, the words I have uttered. and accept them on the basis of your understanding, not out of pure devotion. So in some sense, we could say that the Buddha, our teacher, has given us, his followers and disciples, a kind of a liberty, a freedom to really examine and really make sense of the content of his teachings in relation to our own understanding. And it is because of this, there historically, particularly in the Nalanda tradition, there emerged a great diversity of interpretation of the Buddha's teachings, to the point where distinction is drawn between the provisional nature of some of the teachings and the definitive meaning of some of the teachings. And so to the point where sometimes even the literal statement of the Buddha is not accepted on the surface level meaning, but looked at as a deeper underlying hidden meanings and so on. So I think it is really important to understand this overall history, and also to really recognize that as Buddhists, Buddha really was teaching something to us aimed at understanding the nature of reality as it is. So the nature of reality as it is would require us to apply our mind and critical thinking to be able to understand. And so, for each of the statements of the Buddha pertaining to the truth, we can subject them to analysis. So it's not, Buddha's teachings is not something like a scriptural, has to be accepted as a scriptural authority on a, just a pure faith or devotion. Buddha's teaching can be accepted by examining and relating to the nature of reality and reason. So therefore, it's a very rich tradition. And once we are able to understand this, then our devotion and faith to Buddha will not be just purely a devotion and faith, but it will be a devotion and a faith grounded in reason and grounded in understanding. And this is something that I think is really important, and I want to share with my fellow Buddhists, that to be able to cultivate a faith in the Buddha that is grounded in understanding and grounded in reason. So this is something that is important. And of course, today we're living in a very pluralistic world. And in this world, the fact is there is a multiplicity of different spiritual traditions. And all of these spiritual traditions, we have to understand the place of Buddhism in the context of this plurality of world spiritual traditions. And as Buddhists and followers of the Buddha, we need to be able to identify with fellow spiritual practitioners and sometimes, sort of unite in where we can see commonality. For example, when we look at the ethical teachings of all the great spiritual traditions, there is a convergence on emphasis on cultivation of good heart, compassion, and avoidance of harm. So these teachings are universal, and that's why cultivation of a good heart, and for example, cultivation of patience, forgiveness. So these are universal spiritual values. And it's something that we as Buddhists also need to appreciate when we relate to other traditions. And in my own case, I am a deep admirer of the great heritage of India, the country where I have had the privilege to live now for many years as a refugee, as a stateless person. But India particularly is a place where historically there has been a multiplicity of faith traditions. In addition to Buddhism, there is Hinduism, various traditions of, denominations of Hinduism. There's, of course, Islam, Christianity, and so on and so forth. So there's many sort of, more than several centuries history of the plurality of faith traditions in India. And because of this, India has been able to really promote this idea of plurality, acceptance of the plurality of spiritual traditions. And this is something that I deeply admire. So the two things that I really try to share in the world taken from the Indian heritage, one is the emphasis on ahimsa, the non-violence and avoidance of harm, rooted in compassion. And then the second one is, an explicit adoption of plurality of faith traditions. So these are two important heritage of India, which I really try to share more widely. So, so before we launch into the actual teaching, once again, I want to express my deep gratitude to everyone who has made this teaching, organized this teaching, and also as myself a monastic member, it's a real privilege and joy to be able to be with many fellow monastics today here for this session. Thank you.
Any Minidarish at the Tisamtangiori, Tedalo to second our session, Rangalana, never cure Russian. Soon did a Molu, then a Kemevor, Tode, Tanya Tempeton Gobonjo, Taton Goporto, something Yimigi, draw Gumibala, Ninja and Kevershi. Tegon, Tishi, Sunji Sanjan, Dijani, Molubon, Loy, Papachi, Kuzutini, Shoyanga, Gayo, Namboy, Tenekio, Namboy, Dududan, Keolung, Shudo, Kay, and the Jazu Power shot on draws. Odangadi, Kay and the Jazu Power, Yados and Dragi, Netsoshi Yori, Page, Tome, Chi, a Lamner, Page, Simgi, Surstu. just any go shungdi 치 주주자 뭐이버 소소 라리게는 윤데 뭐나 자네게 다 서워도 가셔를 넘는데 심이 띵네 녀버터부터 첩지 로를 교조 돼야지 요구도가 그래서 아니 그것도 샤양가고 개교 강배교 되네 교 누르다네 개는 거 수도기 개연데 자주 바로 초등 쪽에 어다 쇼버시라 야고도 야마르데 이네 쇼버 탭샤지 기타네 독스탄 죽이요래.
So another point I want to share with you is that on my part, given my dedication to personal practice, there's a passage from the 7th century Indian master Chandrakirti. It is entering the middle way towards the end, concluding part of that text, where he talks about how on the basis of cultivation of compassion on the one side and wisdom of emptiness, understanding the nature of reality on the other, wisdom and compassion. And he compares these two to the two wings of a bird that is, flying across the space to, travel towards the other shore, which is the attainment of Buddhahood, liberation. So it's a poetic articulation of the author's aspiration to attain Buddhahood. And on my part, I find these verses very deeply meaningful. And as much as possible, I strive on the path. And one thing that I can say is that, if you make the commitment not to leave what you have learned just as intellectual knowledge of, Dharma, but in fact, implement them into your own personal life by relating to your own mindset, on way of thinking, on your own state of mind, then we can really see a transformation, a change in ourselves. And when you are able to see the change in yourself as a result of implementation through practice, then you begin to feel a kind of almost as if you could taste what the texts are talking about, so that it does not remain just words and representation in words, but actually there is a sense of reality that sets in. So I could say that although I cannot claim that I'm actually gone quite far, but I could say that at least I have, touched the first part of the threshold of the path that is going to lead me to the other shore. And so perhaps the two wings that I'm using, the wisdom and compassion, aren't as strong as I would like them to be, but still there are two working wings that can at least take me a little bit on the path. So the point I'm trying to make is that it is important that the knowledge of Dharma be actually made real through personal practice, so that you begin to see a change within your own mind.
So now, some questions. Ka.
Chabiti.
Oh. The Champanyesha. That day, any me chance to get on number 2, data took you over. Any that day, shifter ma sugar came into. Any Changzhou so doing Saturday. Champanyesha she, Yanda Pong she, Zuzu Yukambo she, Tessa Wombonga, Donga, Changshu Yana doing, Palang Yana get sa, or the Changzhou so doing. Jordan di go the Chasan chi Kuma do stringni, Rokaji, Chuna, and a Kwa Chasan layer cherisha. Jumden de Sung Lezen Chik Danjaya, True Show Bache, Changzhou Sudun Rodani, the Chasan Chitus, Toma, Tebache, Tenet Tebetan, Yana Yando, some, and some better, Gomun Duzane, Tasson Consu Yama Jevetane, any Rimbeki, Nyamyonki, Nyamyon Degi, any Lola Jotea Chigi, or that those who do your Rudan Dossi. Jasanga Deo Canzo, Shunin de Son, any she guns chose the Nezu, O Nezu. Nezu money trouble Nasi Jenny, co pick 6 some shell money buche, co kanda, Guding the Jani, that dinner in it, or sometimes Chay in the Sane, go Dana Duni Tower Sagi, 60 in a co Yamno Young Denju Tekon is low to Sanichi, chick several chime with the go some nalola, could you tell to go? She, the nigger became young notion in K manner, and Denju Tekona is the order the Umobe, any 2 million tower chat your social your stars model, Dickim to go. Chasaga, tell some comes on Yama church to sound down the Nga, the double toe in the Sigmedi. Kanda Nyamyo Kala Kansa Yudivichi, Chate Yori, Dindri Indu, Mona Chigita, Sanjay Chedi, and Tasson Consu Yamajo in the do some Tambina, Mona Tranegi. She Miss Dagal Shashana, Jondra Yudavata, and it's a Jenny, or da in the Salam Dreachigi. Gade Parangate Parasangotim Buddhist or Sadi, Mone, da Yoya Resha, some Changudu.
So on the text, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, this is a text that is very familiar to the Theravada community. And I don't think it would, it would not be necessary for me to be commenting on the specific words or sections of the text itself. One thing that I would like to share with you is that my suggestion would be to, when we look at a great scripture like this, Maha Satipatthana Sutta, for example, which presents the teachings on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, from my own personal kind of experience is that I find it really helpful to not to look at the specific teachings in their own right in isolation. I always try to look at the great teachings of the Buddha in a broader context, where that specific teaching is coming from and what broader context that teaching is part of. So for example, the 4 foundations of mindfulness is a key practice, which is part of a larger context that is the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment. And the 4 foundations of mindfulness is the first of the 7 sets. So you have the 4 endeavors, 5 faculties, 5 powers, the 4 limbs for concentration practice, and then you have 7 limbs of mindfulness, enlightenment, 7 factors of enlightenment, and 8-fold noble path. So it's important to, even in relation to a practice of, say, 4 foundations of mindfulness, to be able to, first of all, understand it in the broader context of the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, which really presents the whole map of the path to enlightenment. So that, I think, is really helpful. And the other one is to really make a broader comment about generally what Dharma practice entails. Dharma practice entails, for example, in the case of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the 37 aspects of the path to enlightenment, the first stage is the stage of learning, where we have to cultivate the understanding of the teaching by studying, by hearing, by reading. So this is the first level of understanding, referred to as understanding derived through study or learning. The second thing is, now based on what we have studied and learned, we need to now contemplate on it constantly. And so this second stage is more like processing what we have studied, what we have learned, internalizing it. And so this second level is referred to as understanding derived through critical reflection or contemplation. So this is the second level. And the third is then whatever we have understood and comprehended and processed, we then need to meditatively cultivate it, reinforce it. So the third level of understanding is the understanding derived through meditation. So in an ideal world, we should not do them one at a time. In an ideal world, we should do them in an integrated manner. So even when you are studying, you keep contemplating upon it and then immediately practice it. So if we are able to approach using the integration of study, contemplation, and meditative cultivation, then we will really begin to see a change. So what happens is that when we are able to use this kind of approach, then automatically we'll be doing this by relating to our own personal experience. So your Dharma practice does not become talking about something out there in the outside world. Your Dharma practice becomes something about your experience, your state of mind. So once you're able to relate the Dharma teachings from your own state of mind, then we really begin to see a deepening of our own conviction and ascertainment. And through understanding, conviction, and ascertainment, reinforced through constant cultivation, then we really begin to see a change in ourselves. So this is something that I, as an elder member of the Sangha who has done some practice, can share with you from my own personal experience, that through this kind of approach, we can really see a change in ourselves, in our mind.
This one.
No.
Shanata, Kanda Chanshu Sam, Gunduzane, So Junju, the Shivish Savurisha. Jitin Tungichi, you take a Randon Delechon. Jitin Dawachi, you shan't take a Shanton Delechon. Dr. Shangy Tunga, the Yada or Machana, Sanja you to Mirujo Kona, Dawame. Te Young Gunse, Chanshu Sam Dashane, then Dawa and Draw, some sushi Kilu, you say, Oda Junju Sigdi, never show Shivishua. Netting Yinare, some Dante. Shivishu Shabushto.
So
Daganashiki Tungni, Daya Gualia, Kangdus, let's see this triangle. Kangdusun, Chivanum, Transition, Dansheva, Tini Kala, Java, Chaomoli Chiva go. Then the shadow modern, Dambashi, Wajer and the Sankishin, Mudijana, Jumbu 6, and other Sonshadi, Mayan Kolandandi, and Nasadi. The Kanda Chada Jessa Zor de Nasa de Roda, and Nadi Namdungi Rigu, Sayin to Sane, Natun Nia Medevjigi, Cha Yundu, Chechen, and 차단 계약이 시행하고 아니 다른 전에 니기 매드들 리아 네버 토비아 지를 그 평기도가 세상가 나가서 따와가서 전대야디 그 초직네 차단해야지 저기 요래 초직네 남등이거든 남외지고 교르쇼 도지 생매된지 애는 ngō 직도 차지 된지 제불로 저 예매 경고 그 된지 된지도 상담도잖아요 나서야지 켜는 이야매도 버지 차용도 와 자사가 대네 제 나서야 되기 그 초진에 그 너쟁을 차 초진에 그 동력이 따와 상으로 화야기 그 그게 힘으로 차용했지 대상 아니 나를 상던 게 도스
So, sorry, earlier I forgot something. So to conclude, His Holiness was saying that when we are able to truly gain something as a result of our own personal experience, then even when the specific words related to a particular teaching is heard, you have a different kind of feeling when you hear the words. For example, say when we talk about the dependent origination, pratitha samuppada, or for the Tibetan Buddhist, the teaching on emptiness. So when you hear the word dependent origination, pratitha samuppada, if you don't have a deeper practice, then the words just remain words. And then maybe you will have some intellectual understanding that it is an important part of Buddhist teaching or Buddhist philosophy. But beyond that, there is no real emotion on your part. Whereas if you have done some serious practice yourself, then even when you hear the word, like pratitha samuppada or shunyata, the word will have a qualitatively different sensibility for you. The word becomes rich, the word becomes pregnant, the word becomes poignant. So there is a kind of your relationship with the word also changes. So to continue, alongside my own other practices, as I mentioned before, I'm also a great admirer of the 8th century Indian Buddhist master Shantideva. And Shantideva's teaching, particularly on cultivation of our heart, moving towards a more altruistic orientation, is a powerful one. And there are passages, for example, he says that if one is not able to exchange at a deep level, self and others, let alone attainment of Buddhahood, even in this life, there will be no happiness, no real happiness. So then he says about, therefore, by overcoming any sense of weariness, one should ride this horse of altruistic intention and travel from one place of joy to another place of joy. What intelligent person wouldn't want to embark on such a journey? So those are really powerful words. He's really kind of conveying, and this is really, I find these words very powerful and try to sort of implement them in my own life. And similarly, for example, when in relation to the teaching on shunyata, emptiness, there is a passage in Tsongkhapa's line where he talks about how dependent origination is for the unenlightened and ignorant. It's the doorway through which we go to the lower realms, because we get attached, we grasp at it, and then we create negative karma and so on. But for the wise, the truth of dependent origination opens the door to liberation. So this is a very important passage. But for me, I use it slightly in a different way. For example, I try to bring up the notion of an I, and we all know that the thought I am, this aham kara, the thought I am is often the basis of many of the problems. This grasping at I, the grasping at self, is the basis of many of the negative emotions that arises. And then, I leads to, self-centeredness, which leads to grasping, which leads to kind of attachment and so on. But at the same time, the same notion of I can be used in a constructive way for a practitioner by examining the nature of it, by engaging into a critical inquiry. For example, in Chandrakirti's text, he uses what is called the sevenfold analysis of the self, whether the self is identical with the aggregates, whether the self is person is distinct from the aggregates, whether the self resides in the aggregates, whether the aggregates possess the self, whether it is the configuration of the aggregates, or whether it is the collection of the aggregates. So there's a sevenfold analysis. So when you apply the sevenfold analysis and search what exactly is this I that I'm referring to when I think of, that I'm thinking of, we will discover that it is unfindable. When subject to such critical analysis through a sevenfold mode of analysis, we don't find self beyond our constitutive elements that make up our existence. So in this way, even though the notion of self can lead to problem by attachment, grasping, and so on, but at the same time, the fact that we have a natural sense of self allows us an opportunity to use it in a constructive way by applying critical inquiry and wisdom prajna, and discovering that there is no real basis for this strong attachment that we bring about. So in this way, the point is that the teachings of the Buddha and the Dhamma teachings are not something external to our experience. The teachings are something that are relevant to our experience, and by applying it to our own states of mind and mind experience, we'll be able to gain a real change.
Now some questions.
We are indeed rejoiced at the teaching by His Holiness. And this is indeed a blessed teaching for us to have a great teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to teach us different through the teaching of Maha Satipatthana Sutta. His Holiness said, though indeed in a multiplicity of ways, but the faith and devotion to the Buddhas, the cultivation of compassion and wisdom remains applicable to all Buddhist practitioners.
탑시 숭주군이 람냠스네디 시비지 개체뭐 임베다 아니 산제라 대바데 조 균zen라 때네 아니 대바 개고에디 개체뭐 임보고라 여름제 가딘 kalukoti tseso ane tene shuejiga sani 여러분이 추주 쇼게 추주 야가 추주 예반을 구워봐도 가지 주요래 난 지당한 주데 다 티와틀레 미차상라 내가 주 고가 비투음도 제상 티와 가시지다 근두기데 다 안데네 kim바도 제제단에 티와 가시지 고가 비 이 차상기 공발라 자고야지라 ane sosu tragedi khabardi sosu tiwa pubekab mato di khabad pani masharo chwechen tine Thailand gi tenda sachai kuni wat gelo konla ane de chershio pero na shwei
Your Holiness and good morning all Dhamma friends.
Yormjen la kuzungdo tani ene de kalop kaje sense dange changmal teshtere shweji da ne thiwa shwedi sanje ge thambani shala tene ene ngodo digdi thawa da dungye pongwa da salam dene thama thaba toba yang sungyo res tinde indu ene tinde inaya ta mirab sawa phe chewege nire chowek nange kange sigudi kodo chowa yimba inza gyundegi mizenala ane benata thade nem tabudi kapsu kange chungyundu ta thamba nyesha ge dodi ane gyundegi mizeda dene nyamso lenzu korla an gyawr mujegi kalo lamdejik nauro nans
In situation of COVID-19.
benata nem COVID-19 dida je
지금 아주 강에데 태베 그돌로 다디 주던 게 가져 임버들이 삼로서 고고 말봐. 커도 지 강에 채베 커도를 다시 강에 먹고지 미지소 나올 채되지. 이니 미밀이야 지 콘주사야 서로 차도라야 서로 나제지야 서로를 연대기도 와. 다 디도 또 동人都 파다네. 그다 디도 세디 소스 아니 레지 왕게 요구여다 레스야데 심뒤 모두고 타네 요구여 디리가 상로 망스 코레이나 아니 시 강에 체디 다는 밀 주고 딱 레라베 탈 밀 주고 돼야 디디 패시 연구 말에 사디리 인도 가당 안에서 안돼 되지데 지 다산지게 처리야 딘딘 동업하고 대보 딘딘 꾸주하고 대보 딘딘 공부하고 대보 딘딘 람하고 대보 신이 den시송돼야 디디기 도시 den시 모는 대보 차와는 대보 차와 제부터 잡을 대보사 대수체도 도 상도스 예배이나 에네 아주 강에 제주산에 지금 남상식 섬이야 공주사가 서로 지금 중요하고 서로 어디다 배치 매용을 해서 쉬우켜도.
This is your question is very true because for most people, in their day-to-day life, when they encounter difficulties such as adverse situation, tragedy, and so on and so forth, very rarely people are able to, create the space to actually understand what are the causes and conditions behind the situation. People tend to choose an easy path, which is to immediately blame others and latch on to whatever conditions they think is responsible. And because many of the problems arise as part of our being in a society, our tendency would be immediately to blame someone else. And so here, there's a kind of for a lot of people, there's a natural tendency to immediately react and choose a shortcut and try to find someone to blame your problem at. So the true practices, such as through the Satipatthana teachings, and more broadly, the teachings on the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha has given, it can really make a difference, because one of the things that the Buddha's teaching in these texts, scriptures, tell us is the importance of contemplation, to observe, to reflect, so that you don't immediately react in an impulsive way. So when you observe and contemplate in a deeper way, you really begin to see the causes and conditions that are part of it. So that's why, for example, one of the basic teachings of the Buddha is that to a large extent, our suffering and happiness is a function of our state of mind. And to an extent, there's the karmic function of karma involved, but most importantly, our own suffering and happiness is determined by or influenced deeply by the state of mind we have. If we are able to create a more peaceful state of mind, it creates a space for joy and resilience, and able to deal with difficult situations. But if our state of mind is disturbed and undisciplined, agitated, then it leads to more problem. So the state of mind, the happiness and suffering to a large extent is a consequence and function of our state of mind. So by paying attention, creating the space, it really makes a big difference. And here, the most important teachings for the Buddhist, from this broader perspective, is to cultivate an outlook that deeply takes into account the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha said, this is the truth of suffering. This is the truth of the origin of suffering. This is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And this is the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So in this, there is the most important teaching is the teaching on cause and effects, and encompassed in the Four Noble Truths. So when we are able to, deeply reflect and integrate these teachings, then we will be able to create sort of an outlook, a state of mind, and an approach where we will not react in a kind of a immediately reactive manner. And when we are encountering a suffering or a tragedy, we wouldn't respond as if we are shocked that, how can this happen to me kind of thing. So we would not respond in this way because we will be able to have a deeper understanding of the situation. So in this way, I think the Buddha's teaching can really help to create a more open, spacious, resilient mind so that one can be able to deal with immediate challenges in a more constructive way.
산지선데 담바시스 동에다고 구조다고 고고다고 남지 담바스니 송샤 지주차기 또서 거를 쉬베이나 에는 아주 다대변은 내용 그 서로 들어가게 태베 그들이 그 섬나로 다 교도见了 때네 난기 규진 치 규진 망구도스 연구여서 삼고도 남사직 섬을 빼야돼 해로 토르대야돼 배지 용말 봐 다 들어가게 태베 그들이야 참반이 샤근데 치들지 말라위는 어떤 천을 들으셔야 쓰니 샤샤가 리기요래 그 시제 거야 오지 마잖아 지금도 되게 den시스야데 뺏겨서 버려셔 아니 고베다 보셔야 되기 저상어 디르고도 가 동에다부터 꾸주다부 디치고 셈 슌데야 계셔 말이 고베다 보셔야지 요래스잖아요 다 든지 때 인도산에 디 톱지게 람지 템포디 세주시야 쉬우지르샤디
So if we are able to, as I said before, really kind of internalize the teachings, the significance of the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, then we begin to appreciate the complexity of causes and conditions behind many factors. So for example, in the case of COVID situation, for someone who has this ability to appreciate the complex causes and conditions, then such a person would not react to the immediate threat in a very shocking way, because one will have the understanding there are internal causes and external causes and conditions, and then one will seek the necessary avoidance that is important part of protecting oneself, and then not emotionally react in a negative way to challenges, so that one can continue to maintain their own peace of mind. If on the other hand, if someone has not internalized these teachings on the cause and effect, like as in the Four Noble Truths, then even if we ask that person to recite part of a holy scripture, like say, for example, from the Satipatthana Sutta, then that person, because the mind is agitated, will not really benefit even from hearing an important part of a passage as well. So this, I personally feel that the teachings embodied in the Four Noble Truths is a truly, truly profound one and an important one.
Thank you. The next question.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. And His Holiness was saying that, one of the beautiful things about teachings on Four Noble Truths is that although it begins with the truth of suffering and the origin of suffering, which is the story of the problem, but it's not meant there for us to become discouraged and demoralized, because it's followed by the third noble truth, which is the truth of cessation. And then the truth of cessation shows us the possibility of a freedom, and that is a source of really great hope. And when we are able to understand that there is a possibility of cessation, then the interest arises in finding out what is the path that leads to the cessation. So the psychology behind the Four Noble Truths teaching is a beautiful one.
Okay, so thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Dr. Prat Maha Sompong.
Dr. Prat
Ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Sompong, Thailand
Good morning, Your Holiness, and
Dharamsala
in the Dhamma.
Ardula Shwejida, and I was a choto Chazana samrishuwe
has several traditions,
gyaurumje
and the emphasis is
uh,
also
gonga
differently
yimba
placed.
tarta namba sanje be
How
chö
do
chinge
we
sola
interpret
chö yu reme na
or
zo do wa
interpret
tende du
Maha
chö so so
Satipatthana to the
zende na
modern
yu nyamle
Buddhists
mirawa tende du
and
tendi gi ta ngara ze mi da
non-religious
kya par
believers?
chö mengen sola chamba
Thank
nyasha
you.
gi du gongba dilu dobji kandis che wes
sanje be cheba chigi gane ene samtana be chunden degi ene denshi shongo da ene parba chenyi be shongo da ene legwa namba chebe shongo sa degi chunden degi ka da chabu jori dezu che doz lo zhong she yu doz yena ene ngaranzo da nangpa nangza zi chi shangnu tsushi dhamma dhata chi tulo dhamma dhata dhinti tsam ki thwane ene de ngay chugyu da kenzu chugyu sa dhiri shoya ke deyo mari chundan ki tenshi le sambe chue sung shaba di garo chi pa kohar jeba yina ene chöda minrawa zi shira di nganzu chue da ene kenzu chue sa yawa chia medewa chigi da sanjebe choba nangzar da o diri ri da dili ya ene chamba nyesha ga du da di dana da nge di tongdi ya chig di genlong da kangshi chamba nyawara shakwa shivun di da ni simzhan nambar tabar cheba nyangye da mengan dumba nam shigur cheba dungye da yi medewa nam yawar cheba denpa tobar cheba nyangde ngondu cheba che di tamze ki chedo draba chigwe lam yin nos chen di dom chobu sungdu wa che da kanda chi chumden degi chulu sawalo ku gyuda dribu nami tohne sundu zane ene dogyun ni che ene golam ni che denshi sunya di shivu dom chobu resha
So for us, of course, you're right that among the followers of the Buddha, there are many different traditions. For example, when we talk about the Buddha's turning of the wheel of Dharma, some traditions speak about 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is focused on the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. Second turning of the wheel of Dharma, where the key sutras were the perfection of wisdom teachings, primarily focused on emptiness. And then the third turning is the turning that involves sort of further interpretation of the second turning. So there's definitely a diversity among the followers of the Buddha's teaching. But as I mentioned before, the main framework of the Buddha's teaching is really enshrined in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. That is really the basic framework of the Buddha's teaching. So once we are on our part, whatever traditions we may belong to, if we are able to deeply appreciate the significance and the profound meaning of the Four Noble Truths, then we will be able to really relate to other fellow Buddhist traditions as well, without feeling any strong partisanship, differences that may be based on different color of hat or different colors of robes that one tradition may be adopting, but we'll be able to feel a sense of affinity across all the followers of the Buddha's teaching. So that, I think, is an important one. And I keep saying that the Four Noble Truths teaching is a foundational and the main frame. And here, for example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, Buddha presents a very, a comprehensive summary of the efficacy of the path, when he says, here monks, there is amongst this one way to the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and distress, for the disappearance of pain and sadness, for the gaining of the right path, and for the realization of Nibbana. So in this, single passage, Buddha really sums up the heart of what the path, Dhamma, is supposed to lead us to. And that really is the essence of the practice of Dhamma, the aim of the goal of Dhamma and the practice of Dhamma. And the Four Noble Truths offers us really a powerful framework, because suffering and origin are the two, one set of cause and effect, and cessation and path are another set of cause and effect. And in these two sets of cause and effect, there is a very, very comprehensive and a grand synthesis of the entirety of the Dhamma there.
Yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable Maha Navin Arunrat from Thailand to ask your question to His
Kushab
Holiness. Please
Gelong
unmute your mic.
Brahmaha Navin Anurat la Jadishuri.
Respect to the laws of Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha.
Sangye She Gundu la Kimrungu Dutane Gaurmachin la
What is different
Kugurshiwa
between
dan Chapjidu
Maha Satipatthana
Chandra la Neden Debe Luki Panyasha Shimbu Dan
Thank you so
Tejing
much.
Chu using a number you Timbanyasha Kudoni la Kabaka Yures.
Get easy. That's Tom Monula, any Shimju Chemonyo. Chazanga, any go pulse the I don't know, Sari.
So to be honest, because the Maha Satipatthana Sutta was originally not translated into Tibetan, I have not had the chance to read it. So, I have to say that there is no, I haven't been able to compare. So my only response is, I don't know.
Okay. Now next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable
Yaurunch to Cheshweshida Dijela Gelon Narango da Paluwe Damad Dina Tero Kon Sri Lankani Pevikalonjre.
Sarnai Atipujaniya Dalai Lama Nayak Mahinipanan Wahanse Viprat
Yaurunjira Samri Shiong Dutani Tivadi Dirsha Sri Lanka Tenga Mitondu Tuju no Tembanyashago Dunsu Yunayan Tinsan Tadi Dungumidus Shazanga Lamsu de Kasu Chaguru Goge Chujo Kandashidu Sigidus.
Me Trombe Kodulia Panan Dotchabani Shas or Ma Chick Tembayina, any Chimden de San Tangura, any Sanje Chugi Kandachi Chuzi Mongus Tanyundi, Tesamki, Kokanda. Debu Namshi Persi, the Wa Yedavine, Chick Kodea Chigi, Pando Dende Yori, any then Dadron Chimbe Chigi Kasore, the Kimzang Misoda Chigi, and the Chobu Tranchizoi, Doi Sik to Kobayina, and some non dos Chigi.
So definitely the practice of chanting sutras, sacred sutras like Maha Satipatthana Sutta as part of the funeral rite can be very beneficial. For example, in the Interfaith tradition, there is the concept of intermediate state, Andhra Bhavana. And during the intermediate state, the deceased, there is a chance that when family members, loved ones are, thinking about the deceased and dedicated to the deceased well-being, a sutta is cited. And especially a great sutra like the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, will contain a lot of references to the Blessed One, our teacher Buddha, as well as many precious words from the sacred scripture. So there is a chance, there is a likelihood that the deceased consciousness, which may be there before connecting with the rebirth, has a chance to hear. And then more immediately, it will give an opportunity for the grieving family to be able to find some peace, because the focus will be on listening to the chanting of the sutta and being able to even pay some attention in the moment of grief to teachings like the Satipatthana Sutta will have a real immediate impact of creating some peace and comfort for the grieving family as well. So I think it is a really a good practice.
So siva shisene mundu gi siva ene porsi
chisi
en kare
chisi siva
oh
siva jiolema
oh chene oda ene kanda number shiva sadi ko sugle ko gi yomare ko number shiva sadi ko ngobu kanda ine kora nyeleng gyuji gu yorwa so nyeleng sluzana kora riktumbe gyuji gi chasanga sheba sasang riksam digi nyeleng gyudi kora riktumbe jutana drama do lundi ene sheba chi gongeng sheba drama rekia ko gyudu chi yorde yilu number sheba di kora yilu gyun kora tene yonggo achege dinde indusane 아주 미시베 쇼리아 퍼시스야디 그 용되게 요래 애니 디디디 자 그나 풍분님버디 패지 파주시버 순등에 되게 풍분님버디 통야 패지 이해돼 봐 애니 디 종종에 되게 지 대축 선들도 스타베이나 애니 퍼시디기 고야다 통야 유도버지기 편도 유도버지기 된지지.
So in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, there is an explanation of the four aspects or four stages of existence. One is the birth, the second one is the life in between, and the third one is the death, and the fourth one is intermediate state. So intermediate state is the stage in between two rebirths, two births. Underlying this concept of four stages of existence is the understanding that fundamentally human consciousness, not human, the consciousness and body are two separate streams that make up our existence. Human existence is composed of body and mind, but body and mind are two fundamentally different streams of continuity of existence. So when a body ceases, when someone dies, the body ceases, but not the consciousness, because the continuity of the consciousness is rooted upon the successive continuation of the same kind. And this is part of the Buddhist causation theory, where only like things can produce like things. So matter cannot produce consciousness, and consciousness cannot produce matter, even though they can be cooperative conditions with each other. For example, for human mind, aspects of our sensory experiences that are contingent upon physical organs may have some immediate connection to the body, but the deeper manas, the mental level consciousness, is independent of the body. So the continuity of that will carry on. So after the person is deceased, even though the continuity of the body, the consciousness in the body has ceased, but consciousness before taking rebirth, before connecting to a new birth, is still present. So that's one of the reasons why when chantings of sutta and sacred texts are done in the memory and for the dedication of the deceased, there is the possibility that the deceased consciousness can actually have some ability to hear. And there are also suggestions that in some cases, the deceased consciousness can also see perceive their own old body and being there. So in any case, these kind of practices as part of a funeral rite is actually very beneficial.
Pena persi da jar chigi milam glu sach. Azu nam ji milam ta me khodo lo chi mi ring ga she di chue jang bu de mar da ko ren xin gi dang me pa cha de de yin wo milam glu 풍부 니 뭐 le ko so lo su chen de de yo de ge ko ne ngo shi bu de ye o di milam glu ene 풍부 니 뭐 le ba lo su chen ne ene 야 디 연유기 정보 침주주 가르치기면서 제 밀는 걸 류디가 통돼야 되는데 되게 무엇이 버든지 그 시야 중 재산급변은 벌써 서로지 밀는 걸 류사디 도스코 술도 봐 튼체 어디는 신 밀는 걸 류디 그 풍부님 벌레 봐 아니 로스 체니 그 저되게 열어 어디를
So the concept of this intermediate state can be understood by way of an example of a phenomenon that is not that uncommon. And this phenomenon is what is referred to as the dream body. So there are a few individuals, it's not necessarily a consequence of some yogic high practice, advanced practice. For some individuals, it can happen naturally. But there are instances where individuals are able to maintain awareness by adopting a dream body, and they have this unique phenomenological experience of being able to actually observe things around in a dream body and then later report it. So what is happening in the intermediate state is somewhat similar to this phenomenon of a dream body.
그 정신기야 가셔 다 뭐면 박자 얘기를 야 밀음글로 수도 정해진지 용기요래 야 알아서 곰점네 밀음글로 수도 치야 된대 세상에 정우전에 아니 밀음글로 파 수도 풍부님벌 로스 파체네 로봇은 통말로 세상에 밀음글로 송나 소바치야 약수도 배제 들으셨어.
So these phenomena in the cases where it naturally happens are not really a result of some advanced practice. Some people are able to do it, and then they report their phenomenological experience. But there are also practices which actually are called dream yoga, and the dream yoga, through dream yoga, some advanced yogis can actually consciously assume dream body and then actually have the phenomenon and the experience of that phenomena. So because of this, and I do know one or two individuals who actually have that capacity. So, and I was, sometimes I joke saying that if someone can have that ability to adopt dream body, then this could be a very powerful way of, becoming a spy, because people, other than oneself, others cannot observe that dream body. It's very subjective and internal. So the person can still, being able to travel around. So it's the best form of spy could be someone who has that capacity of assuming dream body.
Now next, that's all we know. Now, next question.
Thank you.
조지마.
His Holiness, we still remain two more questions.
여름시 두제 쉬어지다 안조 티와 제르슈에 다 상만이유.
Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
텐다 스리랑카니 구샵 인다라구리 vipassitiro gelon 콩라 자리슈로 치슈에지 콩티와디 디르샤 당보 겨울음을 거장으로 다네 트와슈에 디르샤 오중을라 때네 템바냐샤 타침바 인바이나 템바냐샤 데라 아나 시 lu chor sem chu tembanya shi jogo bi yun kain nams
저선 거라 슈그마 셰인주산에 지용으로 걸어야 애는 전번이샤시 애는 류 전번이샤 섬 전번이샤 애는 쉐 전번이샤 애는 가서 소가 전번이샤스네 고 전번이샤 시스네 남샤든지 수용 그 요래 애는 디나네다 우 전번이샤 애는 다 되게 안돼 쉬야들이 그때기 전번이 시작은 누구로도 처로 심부이나 애네 가서서네 심 전번이 시작 슈로 처로 심부이나 애네 풍부히 원래 고소로 취하든지 용식을 봐 어떻게 저래서 고정다 잡으시래
So the four foundations of mindfulness is a very well-known teaching where the cultivation of mindfulness is applied to four specific objects. These are body, feeling, mind, and mental objects or mind objects. So that's the broad teachings of cultivation of mindfulness, and mindfulness of breathing is part of that. And so in the four foundations of mindfulness, what we see is a progressively movement from body, feeling, mind, and mental objects. Once one is able to deepen the ability to place one's mind and abide mindfully, beginning with body and so on, and especially in the context of in relation to mind, taking the third object, then one will be able to gain mastery over one's states of mind as well. To the point, some of these yogic abilities could be achieved as well, such as dream yoga.
알조다 아다 뇌슝네 세르랑게 요마레 나가 슝네 애니 시바 차라 먹고 숨고도가 산다딩 안서 치워서 거리야 용야게 낭지 톱스 세디 지tum으로지 니쿠 그도를 연구요래 내가서 뭐쳐 돼야지 쟤네 아니 치워서도 니지워서서네 들 숨고도가
So it's, although it is not that explicit in the sutta teachings with relation to the nature of mind, although there is the application of mindfulness on mind, but it is in the Vajrayana teachings we see more detailed and explicit explanations about the different levels of subtlety of mind and subtlety of consciousness. And this is, in this context, we also speak of the consciousness during the waking state, consciousness during the sleeping state, dream states, and so on. Progressively, the sleeping state is subtler than the waking state, and dreaming state is subtler than the waking state, and deep sleep state is subtler than the dreaming state. So, and in this context, there is a reference to a pure luminosity, luminous nature of the mind, and the subtlemost luminous state arises at the point of death. So there are specific techniques and practices in the Vajrayana teachings where yogi cultivates to attain these deeper states of consciousness and deliberately cultivate this luminous or clear-light state of mind.
나디 나가 슝드스 나로려 세우도가 사슈르팀 춘메르팀 메룬르팀 루남실르팀 남신 난가르팀 수르자네 에네 동보시디 샤용구요레 사다디 팀르자네 미규도 도도 카나메히도 사게 나와든데 차용하지 에네 베나 어디 슈고다 샤바라보디를 파 템차를 제라 에네 뉴걸 해지지 왜서 처음부터 간래 연도 에네 나와 체바 토바니토사게 또 디 아니 가소래 탐지도 뭐 세샤야 그 공리야 어디 난지 톱숨 사디 샤지 용기여라 다 나로 참으로 시골이 아니 안다 조단도 또스 규유이나 아니 치워 생活도 주고 그도 다 안다 나와 치워 나왔냐토 아니 어디도 서도 사버지기 뭐셔버지기 다들 뭐쳐야라 니유에서 쓰면 되기 아니 그 지금 먼저 정다서로 차대요래 어디를
So in these teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, we also see descriptions of the different stages of the dissolution that happens, particularly at the point of death. So these the 4 stages of the dissolution of the body, the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, wind, and then finally the wind dissolves into consciousness, and consciousness into space. And these, the last stage of the dissolution, so each of these stages of dissolution are correlated with external and internal signs that the person will experience. And especially the final stage of dissolution, where consciousness dissolves into space, there are furthermore 4 levels of 4 stages referred to as the appearance, increased appearance, attainment, and clear light. So we are progressively now dissolving into a subtler state and so on. So the final stage is the clear light of death. So, and this is what the yogi is training. And of course, all of us will one day have to go, and we will be confronted with the experience of death. So for the yogi, the opportunity is to cultivate awareness so that when the person yogi is going through the different stages of dissolution, one is able to recognize, now I'm at this stage, now I'm at this stage. And to be able to maintain awareness in the naturally occurring dissolution processes, what is needed is to train ourselves. And the dream yoga is a way of training. And part of that in our training involves, first of all, being able to cultivate lucid dreaming so that you recognize dream as dreams. And so the dream yoga, dream stage, provides us an opportunity to cultivate that kind of recognition of the different levels of subtlety of consciousness.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. So this is the last question.
Da nga ju di to tamayi Indonesia ni gelong Badra Budi re
Thank you so much
Badra
for
Budi
the chance.
chandu
I
shu na
respect to His Holiness.
gyawrum la kogab de kati na tuji che che da
I was very happy
ane de
listening the matter
chushu
about Satipatthana explained.
chazang wala samri da ane tamani cha kor ka chun na wala
Question
ka
to
che
you.
shu che da
What
nge
is the
ti
best way
thwa
to
ti dus
train
ma da yin
Satipatthana
ta rani göndu ba rap chu ba yin be cha
as
ne
monk
gyönden do tamani
and
ja
members of
nyamlen gi
Sangha?
nyamslen gi tabshi ya shu ka res
다디 런이 경이 삼바 진짜겠다 그게 잠바디 밀음 순절이야 그게 근den도 그 숙성보시 대하 정보이나 밀음 순절이야 간다지 지금 밤락이 예봐 막어야게 어디 되게 판도 열어 그 뒤 근den에 막결론이 삼바디 세득이 내가 저도 마세베 니득이 내가 에네 그 뒤거로도 고마주나 수고 벌써 내가래 막결론이 사버디 다 결론도 패시다 그 간다 풍부 뒤파 식사를 제일 시야도야 가고르디 얘네 수순 두시르디 막결론이 사ben 두시디 레토그로 어디르리샤.
So for the monastic members, one of the most important practice is to really constantly cultivate the mindful awareness of the thought that I'm a bhikshu, I'm a monk. And this awareness, this mindful awareness of yourself as a bhikshu and your strong identification with that is really helpful, so that not only during the waking moments of your life, that mindfulness of yourself as a bhikshu will serve as the broader context in which you engage in your everyday activity, but you should cultivate to a point where even in your dream, when you're dreaming something tempting, the thought mindfulness will arise. No, I'm a monk. I'm a bhikshu. So if you are able to really cultivate your awareness and mindfulness of yourself as a bhikshu at that level, that will really help bringing mindfulness into many aspects of your everyday life. And then His Holiness was saying that if that awareness is very strong, one may even be able to bring it into the intermediate state as well, even though there is no physical body. So in a technical sense, you're not a bhikshu anymore, but still that awareness that I'm a monk will be a powerful one.
소다기 베나 년세 나라니 아니 셀러 레버 템보 아니 후 가서 어제니 셀러 때 먹었다 제가 하던 뒤에 나라 지 4년 지금 도 거두이니 지금도 전시 때야지 송구도가 어디는 저리샤
So for example, yeah.
주주로서 나방아 눈에 다들 제왕아 애네 가서 가다 소다의 예제기 로다 시사되기 뒤균되네 전시도 st야지 도가
So if you look at the precepts that make up the monastic vows of a fully ordained bhikshu, we will see that many of the secondary precepts are connected with our everyday behavior, everyday conduct of sleeping, walking, eating, and resting, and so on and so forth. So we don't want to go into the details of the exact precepts specific to what kind of action we are, but the point is there are these precepts. And what this is suggesting is the importance of maintaining mindful awareness throughout your daily activities. For example, we speak of 4 main, kind of activities: sleeping, walking, eating, and and then resting. So these 4 main activities, we are advised to bring both mindfulness as well as meta-awareness, or clear knowing, as it is translated sometimes, but meta-awareness, so that you bring mindfulness where you are maintaining your awareness, but there is also a secondary level of meta-awareness, so that you are able to monitor your own behavior. So this combination of mindfulness and clear knowing, or meta-awareness, is something that needs to be brought into everyday behavior and intention and thought. And that's one of the reasons why the monastic vows are so detailed. There are specific precepts pertaining to specific aspects of our activity. And what this emphasis shows us is the important role mindfulness and samprajnana, the clear awareness, really plays in our everyday life.
Okay, next. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. His Holiness, we have come to an end of our Day 1 teaching program by His Holiness. Indeed, we have a wonderful and fruitful day for listening.
And three nima tunda tempachida
associating with the wise, the great teacher, and more importantly,
nima tsada debaji chungsong
and lineage and background that we are all coming from.
ane shueji ta gyawarmji tabuji ta lama tsada debaji kununi mo ka ju shuede ke sangbore ane di karin samshido ngaran suso chugu penzula tanang ki pa kyawa chegwe kechmure and same nyamdo nge nyamdo ane gyawarmjela karin jedin koni tujiche shurona shueji ane
Sadhu.
아니 사두스도 세치기 서슴 뭐님도 소로나 쉐 아니 참마 제우
Sukita Hontu. May all beings be well and happy.
ਸਮ제 담제 대화다 때문에 주시스 좀
Tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guru Gigi.